All right, so let's get started. I want to thank you guys for joining us for our cybersecurity webinar today. My name is Jason Etheridge, and I am the president of LogicSpeak. For those of you who aren't familiar with LogicSpeak, we are a managed IT services provider for small and medium-sized businesses serving the Southeast and headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. One of our major focuses in 2020, even before our current COVID-19 situation, is increasing the security posture of our clients and minimizing their risk. So we've really been looking forward to this webinar as we all are adjusting to this new normal of working from home and working remotely. So on to a few quick introductions and some housekeeping, and then we'll get started. First, we'll hear from Marc Debrody and Josh Reed with the United States Secret Service. Marc's been with the Secret Service for 24 years and oversees the Electronic Crimes Task Force that is responsible for conducting computer-related crimes investigations that include business email compromise, ransomware, computer mobile forensics, and network intrusion and data breach investigations. Josh has over 15 years of law enforcement experience and is a certified computer, mobile device, skimming device, and network intrusion forensic examiner. He specializes in network incident response and is actively engaged in complex ransomware, point of sale, business email compromise, and unauthorized access cases. After they share a bit about the current threat landscape, Megan Arena from Datto and Nathan Martin from OneBeacon Insurance will be joining us for our panel conversation. Megan is a strategic channel sales manager with Datto, a world leader in providing business continuity and disaster recovery solutions. She's been with Datto for 5 years and works with partners like us to help businesses in data protection and recovery. And last but not least, Nathan manages an underwriting team dedicated to technology-related accounts at OneBeacon Insurance. He's been underwriting commercial insurance since 1993 and is well-versed in the ins and outs of cybersecurity business insurance. Before I turn it over to Marc and Josh, I do want to remind you all that you can add questions along the way in the Q&A section of the Teams app, and we will be answering as many questions as we can during our panel conversation. I also want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today and our presenters as well. So let's get started. Marc, it's all yours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Jason. I want to thank LogicSpeak for the invitation to Josh and I to join this webinar and panel discussion today. Happy to be here. To say these are unique times is certainly an understatement. I say that as a Secret Service agent working from home like you all in the audience, competing for bandwidth with my children who are playing Xbox, working on schoolwork, and a wife that's also working from home. Just a few weeks ago, this would not have even been a consideration for anyone in my line of work, but here we are. Adjusting to the new realities, which for me, on a personal note, includes a COVID-19 haircut that was performed last weekend by my wife and 14-year-old daughter, who incidentally are not hairdressers. Yes, they actually sat me on my back deck with a towel draped around my neck and a glass of Merlot, and calming my nerves, they went ahead and well, the rest is history. So of all the people on this panel interview and on the audience here, I'm the most thankful that the video feature is actually disabled. So let's go ahead to, well, we're on slide 2 here with the introduction. So why is the Secret Service even at this party? Why would an agency that is really more known for protection be part of a cybersecurity discussion? The answer is actually depicted in some of the photographs that you see on the screen here. The Secret Service was created in 1865 by the gentleman on the right, Abraham Lincoln, but not for the reasons that you might expect. During the Civil War, there was an abundance of counterfeit currency in circulation that was devaluing the US dollar. And to combat that, President Lincoln created the Secret Service to identify and arrest counterfeiters. Ironically, on the night that he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, he did not have Secret Service protection. Feel free to use that for your family night trivia, for family night trivia nights. It wasn't until our nation suffered the loss of our third U.S. president through an assassination, the third being William McKinley, I believe in 1901, that the Secret Service received protective responsibilities for our nation's leader, thereby making us, as you see here, a dual mission agency. Our investigative mission over the years has evolved from the Department of Treasury to the Homeland Security Department following 9/11. And then with the signing of the Patriot Act, the Secret Service, we were formally tasked with helping to secure our nation's financial infrastructure. And with financial fraud being predominantly cyber-related crime, the Secret Service created a task force model called the Electronic Crimes Task Force, ECTF, which is basically a partnership between private sector, law enforcement, and academia to collaboratively tackle the cybercrime challenges we face in this space. We have over 40 task forces across the country and overseas, including our one here in Atlanta, which has around 450 members. And we believe wholeheartedly in partnership, we're able to more effectively address these emerging threats through information sharing and collaboration. Nobody wants to exchange business cards when their hair is on fire. And I guess I'm on the hair theme, so I apologize. But seriously, we encourage you to connect and establish a relationship with your local ECTF task force. That information can be found at secretservice.gov, www.secretservice.gov. And on our main page, you'll find a locator that will assist you in connecting with a task force. Slide 3, please. So while a tremendous amount of emphasis is placed right now on personal hygiene to avoid infection, and really rightfully so, we would like to remind folks that it's also important now to practice good cyber hygiene. Cyber criminals really view the current telework COVID-19 situation as a target-rich environment. The criminals they still have their fishing rods with a capital P, and they're casting their lines really more than ever before. They're just using new bait. They're using COVID-19 bait. From the Secret Service perspective, our messaging has not really changed post-COVID-19. Business email compromise, ransomware, as you see listed here, are our top two cyber crimes that we see not only in Atlanta but across the country. They just now have a COVID-19 flavor in the emails, the attachments, and etc. that are enticing workers to take the bait. The good news is that we feel with education and training, you can reduce your exposure in some cases and even prevent in some instances the attacks from being successful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh Reed, who is a network intrusion forensic analyst. That's a mouthful, with the Secret Service here in Atlanta. Josh has a list of cyber certifications a mile long, to include instructor at the National Computer Forensic Institute, NCFI, in Hoover, Alabama. Josh can certainly talk the language of bits and bytes for those tech-savvy people in the audience, but he really has a gift of being able to communicate complex cyber concepts in a language that most people can understand. So I'm going to have Josh take it away for this first part. Josh?
Hey, thanks, Mark. As Mark said, and during the intro, I'm a network intrusion forensic analyst. The vast majority of my time is spent doing network incident response, and then analyzing the data associated with those responses. We talked about going over some of the current trends that we're seeing, out in the wild right now. And being a cyber nerd that I am, I guess, I would like to get up here and talk about sophisticated malware variants and advanced adversaries and things like that. But we're not seeing a ton of that. Of course, it's out there, but what we're seeing the most of by far is business email compromise. A couple of years ago, we could give these presentations and half the audience wouldn't know what business email compromise is. And today it's a little more well known than it was, but there are still a lot of people who are not familiar with what BEC is. So we're going to talk about that today and some of the attack vectors and things like that associated with it. So what is business email compromise? It's basically just a fraud by which cyber criminals convince victims to wire large amounts of funds or send valuable data to criminally controlled accounts. It's also been called CEO fraud or man-in-the-middle fraud. Next slide, please. And as I just said, it's becoming more prevalent now and in the news, and you're starting to hear a little bit more about it. As you can see, very recently, just a couple of months ago, Barbara Cochran from Shark Tank was actually, there was a Twitter post about her or one of her employees being a victim for $400,000. It's almost weekly now. If you subscribe to cybersecurity feeds and things like that, or even mainstream news, you'll see some form of fraud associated with email, because inherently we tend to trust email. When you get an email from your boss, you believe it's from them, or when you get an email from a colleague, you believe it's from that colleague. And email was originally designed as a form of communication. It didn't have a whole lot of security built around it. And these bad actors are leveraging email more than ever to facilitate their fraud. Next slide. So just talking about the scope of really how big of a problem this is, global loss is estimated at 27 billion with a B, from 2013 to December of 2019. I heard a statistic recently that almost half of all cybercrime right now can be attributed to business email compromise. An average loss, as you can see on your screen, of $138,000. That doesn't sound like a ton of money to a Fortune 1000 company or to a big enterprise company. However, $138,000 is still a lot of money, and certainly to a small to medium business, that can be the difference in them making payroll or being able to keep the lights on at their business. So it's definitely affecting our economy in major ways. It's definitely a global and certainly a domestic epidemic. It's reported in all 50 states and in 150 countries. And there are some sectors that are more targeted than others. Real estate comes to mind. Anybody that deals with large transactions are definitely a target, but we've seen it across the spectrum where all businesses are a target. Advance, please. So why does BEC work? Why do these bad actors and criminals, why are they moving from a lot of the other scams to business email compromise? It's because it's low risk. It's easy for them to be anonymous. They use proxies and VPNs and Tor networks, and they found ways to anonymize themselves a lot more, so the risk on their end is very low. There's no malware to install. A lot of times when we work these investigations, they're contained solely to the email environment. The network itself's not touched. It's just the email environment's been compromised, and it's not done by any sophisticated malware or anything like that. It's just facilitated through credentials that have been compromised or of course, someone clicking on a phishing email, which we'll talk about shortly. Again, you don't need a lot of tech, just a web browser and connectivity, so it can be conducted out of almost anywhere in the world. We talked about the rewards that the bad actors can get if they hit the right victim. And then over the last several years, there have been a ton of major data breaches. Mobile carriers and hotel chains and just tons and tons of database dumps are out in the wild right now that contain usernames and passwords. And while everyone's almost guilty of it in this internet society that we're in, we have to have a ton of passwords. People tend to reuse passwords, and that's definitely not bad practice. And these bad actors know that we tend to use reuse passwords, so they'll grab these passwords from these data dumps, and then they will try them across other accounts associated with that individual. And if that individual reuses passwords, then of course they log right into those accounts. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but two-factor authentication still not super popular. And if it was, it could do away with 80–90% of all business email compromise if people just used a form of multi-factor authentication. Next slide. So talk briefly about the anatomy of a business email compromise. First things these bad actors will do will identify targets. They identify these targets through a myriad of ways. Sometimes it's just random. They'll cast a wide net and see who clicks on it or what they can get to bite. Sometimes it's more of a spear phishing attack where they'll go after a specific individual. And then once they identify that target, of course, they're going to gain access. The vast majority of the time, this access is gained through phishing emails. And then once they gain access to that network, they're going to move laterally. They're going to find out in that email environment who the accounts payable people are, who the accounts receivable people are, who the C-suite is. They'll learn, more about a business than some of the employees know. A lot of times when we get in looking at log files in these email environments, we can see dwell times, or dwell time meaning how long those bad actors have been in that environment for months. I think the average dwell time right now is still hovering between 90 and 100 days. So those bad actors will sit in an environment for around 90 to 100 days before they facilitate that fraud. Once they move laterally and identify the players, they'll conduct the target interaction, or they'll jump in the middle of the wire, which we'll talk about here shortly. And then ultimately they will monetize, they'll cash out, and they have money mules and a sophisticated financial network that they use to launder those proceeds. So what kind of tactics do these bad actors use? The most common tactic is, once they gain access to those accounts, they set up what we call watcher rules in that email environment. So basically, they will set up rules with that when a specific email comes from a specific entity, or if an email contains words like account or pay or $sign or invoice or transaction or something like that, they will basically flag that email, send it to, sometimes they send it to RSS feeds, sometimes they send it to the recycle bin, but almost always they set up a offline or out of network email account. It's usually like a Gmail account or something, and they will have those emails forwarded to an account off-site. So then those attackers can just view that email in their webmail that they set up. And then also, if for whatever reason the network administrator or the user changes that email password, it doesn't matter. Those bad actors can still get access to those emails because they've been forwarded off-site. Next slide, please. Here's a copy of an email rule. This isn't a very specific email rule, but basically in Office 365, which, it's a lot of people use that. By all means, Microsoft does a tremendous job of implementing security in their products. It's in Office 365 by no means is inherently flawed or anything like that when it comes to security. However, these bad actors know that a lot of people use Office 365, therefore a lot of this fraud is conducted through Office 365. And if you do use Office 365, if you'll go to File, Properties, and View Rules and Alerts, you can see a list of rules. Well, hopefully you don't see any rules unless you set them up, but if you do see rules in there, then you definitely want to look into that. Because this is where those rules are created and they're listed there. But that this again is where the bad actors will go in, and if you see a rule that says forward all emails to this Gmail address or anything like that, you definitely want to address that immediately. So some other tactics that these bad actors use is they just use additions to standard emails. So if your email was john@widgetcompany.com, they would, spoof an email from that address, and it would be john.widgetcompany@gmail.com or at yahoo.com. They basically take a legitimate address and just put a webmail address on top of it. They'll also just spoof the name slightly or the title of slightly. As you can see on the second line there, Mike@email.com can be very easily confused with rnike@email.com. They also change and spoof domain names, just by slightly misspelling something. If you look at the first example on the third line, you'll see www.tdameritrade.com, and then the versus www.tdameritrade without an I. So of course, missing that one I is a completely different domain. So what we ask people to do is just do a hasty search. When we compare it to when you get out of your vehicle in the middle of the, in an environment you're not familiar with to get gas or something at 11 o'clock at night. What do you do when you get out of your car? You typically look around. You just kind of see if anything doesn't look right or anything is suspicious. We really want users, computer users, email users specifically, to do that sort of hasty search and just look at those domain names and look, and if something doesn't look right, be careful before you click on it. Be careful before you reply to it. Those hasty searches are very important, and a lot of these phishing attempts could be avoided if we, of course we're all busy, but if we could just slow down and look a little closer. So of course these bad actors use social engineering, and in the social media society that we live in, there's just a ton of information out there about us. You know, we have LinkedIn pages, we have Facebook pages, Instagram pages. And, you know, we put out there where we went to college or what our, you know, background is or things like that. And these bad actors will, once they identify that target, they'll go out and they'll conduct their reconnaissance. They will look into things to see if they have something to prey on. A really quick, a clever phishing technique that I've just recently heard about was a bad actor actually was looking at a target to try and, you know, obtain some information about them. And the bad actor actually leveraged the target's child, their social media page, and found out that they played soccer. The bad actor then spoofed a message from what was supposed to be the soccer coach. Then the target clicked on that and they were able to infiltrate them that way. So these guys get very clever. Next slide, please. They also use phishing. We'll beat phishing to death right now in this COVID-19 environment. Phishing is definitely a vector that they all use. All malware variants across the board are using phishing, specifically in business email compromise. Vishing, they also use vishing, which is just voice phishing. These are now commonly used along with phishing in these engagements. We'll see that the bad actors have used a vishing attempt or a vishing scheme along with phishing to facilitate that fraud. Really quick, a recent campaign that we worked last year. You know, it was a large campaign to where bad actors would send out an email wanting people to log into their email or log into their OneDrive to view an encrypted document. Once they clicked on the page, it would forward them to a page controlled by the bad actor. The bad actor would harvest those credentials, and those credentials would then be used to by the bad actor to facilitate the fraud. So if you can see on your right there, I mean, they're like log in with O365, log in with Outlook. The bottom one's just like log in with something. So they're just trying to get any credentials they can. So as far as protecting yourself from business email compromise, we'll touch on some cyber hygiene here shortly, but education. We have to educate each other, educate our colleagues, our employees, and let them know that this is a real issue right now. Phone communications, use it. If a transaction is going to be made, pick up the phone before you send that large wire. Pick up the phone and make sure that account information is correct. Email communications, make sure that you know nothing shady's going on in your email environment. Of course, implement company policies for financial transactions, and then contact financial institutions immediately. If you do get involved in one of these business email compromise, reach out to the Secret Service or the FBI so that we can start taking steps to start investigating, and hopefully, if we can do it in a timely manner enough, we get notified, we can work on trying to recover those funds. Well, that's it about business email compromise. I'm going to kick it back over to Marc to talk about ransomware.
All right, guys, ransomware is just nasty. If you've been a victim of this, you can appreciate that statement because it can have a tremendous effect on your company's ability to operate at all. Ransomware, by definition, is a malicious software or malware that denies access to your system and data until a ransom is paid. The US CERT.gov website there is actually a fantastic website, just by way of a reference for further information on COVID-19 scams and ways you can protect your business in this new environment, teleworking security concerns and whatnot. So I recommend that website as well. The splash screen you see here of some examples of what computers look like when they're infected. Basically, you get a warning label like this saying, "Hey, you pay the Bitcoin to get your data, or you're basically out of luck." The reality of it is that if you don't have offline backups, air-gapped, segregated backups that are not connected to your network, you're not going to get your data back. So unless you pay. So backups, backups, backups. It's like real estate, location, location, location. Next slide, please. It's a big problem. This slide just shows it says 8 billion in 18. The reality of it is we don't know how much loss in ransomware because most businesses that are victims don't want to report it for fear of, especially publicly traded ones, for fear of losing, stock prices going down, whatnot. So this is what has been reported through various companies that are in this space, but in reality, it's probably more. One of the scary points is bullet 3. 75% of organizations with infected systems had up-to-date endpoint detection. So look, you're only as good as your weakest link, and your weakest link may be that 18-year-old intern at the keyboard of your business who has not been trained on how to identify a phishing attack. And so all it takes, I always say the biggest gap or biggest security threat is the 18 inches between the chair and the keyboard, and that is in fact the case. So you have to train your folks on what to look for, and phishing is one example of how these folks get in. Next slide, please. These are the vectors, the common vectors that we see for ransomware. Malicious email attacks, just like a business email compromise. Drive-by downloads, that's clicking a pop-up on a website. If you're surfing websites you shouldn't be surfing and a pop-up happens and you click it, it could be a download, a drive-by download that's going to begin the process of installing malware. Even good websites have pop-up ads and can contain these exploits. So having your browser and your software operating system patched regularly, and even using adware services to block ads can limit your exposure. The next two I'm going to talk about on the next two slides. Next, please. Remote desktop protocol, RDP, is how a lot of these guys are getting in because they just simply scan, they have tools to scan the internet and see open ports on computers, and that's how they can access your network. And then using, brute force to attack weak passwords by administrators are a way they can then move laterally and install their malware. Next slide. Managed service providers are the new victims in many of these cases because simply it's more bang for the buck. We have a case here in Georgia where a small doctor's office was attacked, and the bad actors didn't even want to deal with the doctor's office and paying the ransom. It was their managed service provider that they rang for $2.5 million in ransom. So managed MSPs are the new targets because there's just obviously more return for their criminal investment. Next slide. The disturbing part of ransomware is the movement to exfiltrating data after they're in your network and holding that as basically another form of ransom to make you pay. So exposing data that you find valuable on the internet is one way that they'll try to entice you to pay and get money from the scam. Next slide. If you're infected, what we want you to do is isolate your systems. That means disconnecting your network cable, disconnecting it from Wi-Fi. We ideally would like you not to power down because that would reduce some forensic ability that we have. We do come and respond. Obviously, alert law enforcement. We always say call someone, call the FBI, call Secret Service. There's plenty of crime to go around. We're not selfish. We will respond, and we do deconflict internally. Pay the ransom. Officially, the government's response is no, we don't pay ransom. We don't suggest it. It's a pure business decision. Obviously, there are people that have to do that because their business would be out of operation if they didn't. But keep in mind who you're dealing with. You're dealing with criminals. So most cases will get your data back. However, you also are more susceptible to future attacks, and it's perpetuating the problem. So it's certainly a business decision, but the government officially does not recommend it. Next slide. All right, Josh, I'm going to let you take this. We have about 5 minutes to kind of run through this, and then we'll get to the panel, which I think folks will find most valuable.
Sure, thanks, Mark. We're going to talk quickly about some cyber hygiene tips that you can take both in your business life and in your professional life and your personal life to kind of make you a little bit safer when you're out here dealing with anything internet or cyber related. Next slide. We talked about it. Passwords. Use strong passwords. right now, spring 2020 is not a good password. If you're an administrator, admin or admin1 or admin $sign is not a strong password. When it comes to passwords, length matters. So the longer the password, the better. And then if you can include special characters, mix in some uppercase, lowercase, definitely make your password stronger. Next slide. Avoid password autofill. A lot of our applications and utilities right now want to try to do us a solid and save our passwords for us. It's not a good habit. If you lose your machine and it's not encrypted, or if your machine's infiltrated and everything's stored right there in your browser and on your machine, bad actors can grab those, saved passwords and then move, of course, into those applications. Next slide. Encryption, please use it. It's very big and prevalent in phones right now. Everyone wants a phone that's encrypted. Treat your laptops and other devices the same way. If encryption is available, then use it. Encryption basically just scrambles your data, and it's encrypted until you enter that password to decrypt it. But if that machine is stolen or lost, or that device is stolen or lost, if it's encrypted, then it's just a paperweight. So make sure that you use encryption if you can. Next slide. Patching. It's annoying to everyone when you're watching Netflix online or doing anything on your machine, and those Adobe pop-ups come up, or Java pop-ups, or anything, and it wants you to update. Even though it's annoying, do it. There's a reason that they want you, or we want you to patch your applications and your operating systems. Just like we see those updates, the bad actors see those updates, and the minute they see those patches come out, they start trying to develop exploits or develop malware to exploit those vulnerabilities. So please patch when you can. Next slide. We talked about this earlier: two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. It could stop a tremendous amount of fraud. So basically, everybody's familiar that one of the most common ones is when you're using your computer to have your phone as a second form of authentication. So you'll get an access code when you go to log into something, and you'll take that access code from your phone, plug it into the application you're using. That adds a huge layer of protection, so that if whatever reason your application's compromised, the bad actors won't have access to that other form of authentication and can't facilitate their fraud. Next slide. Antivirus, use it. There's a ton out there. Also keep it up to date. It does a great job of stopping, the vast majority of malware and adware and everything else. So definitely use AV. Next slide. Marc talked about this in ransomware. Back up your data. And also it's super important to keep that data that's backed up offline. Don't have it connected to your machine. If you're using one machine and you have an external hard drive or something, if you have a network, of course, make sure those backups are, segregated from the network, because ransomware, of course, definitely likes to go after and delete those backups. Next slide. Clean up your storage media. If you don't need it and it's, could be valuable in any form to an adversary, just delete it. No sense in keeping, gigs of files on your machines that doesn't serve you a purpose anymore, but may be valuable to someone else. Next slide. Yep. Online safety. Be careful, as Marc said, of the websites you go to. Be careful of what you download. Make sure that when you're on the internet, that the websites are secure. Have TLS, or if you look up there and you see the little lock icon, it's by no means foolproof. However, it is a layer of security that any website you're visiting should probably be a secure website. Next slide. Try to avoid public or free Wi-Fi. These are, hot spots for bad actors to try and, hijack sessions or conduct man-in-the-middle attacks. So sometimes we have to get on public or free Wi-Fi, but if you do, you can go and advance to the next slide. Yep, use a VPN. VPN will create you an encrypted tunnel to conduct your internet traffic through. There's a ton of VPNs out there that are very affordable, and you can cover multiple devices to include your phone, your machines, your family's devices. So definitely use a VPN. Here's a link to CISA had put out about coronavirus. It's just guidance and things like that to some for information that the government's put out there right now about this situation that's going on with COVID-19. And on your screen now is our contact information. That 24-hour number is manned by an individual, not an answering service. So we're here to answer your questions or to take those calls if you have any. You think you may be a victim of business email compromise or ransomware, and then Marc and I's direct number is on the screen as well.
With that, I think we're going to pass it back over to Jason.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for that incredibly valuable information. I know that our attendees really appreciate it. So with that, we're going to transition into our panel time, and we're going to welcome Megan and Nathan to the conversation. Nathan, welcome to the panel. We're glad you're here. My first question is for you. We've heard from Marc and Josh about all the threats that we should be on the lookout for and what we can do to kind of help mitigate that. But let's say we don't. Let's say we get, we have some sort of a data loss or we have some sort of issue. What protections are available to us from an insurance perspective in case one of those threats gets us?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, there are a lot of different products out there in the market, and they really vary in the types and scopes that they're out there, but they can be tailored to your different businesses. And if you need to really start with a general liability policy and a professional liability policy that covers any financial loss due to an errors and omissions. And from there, you could add in cyber liability coverage, and that can be in a package policy with the E&O, or it could be purchased separately. The key thing to make sure is that the cyber liability policy is covering both your business, meaning first party, or if you look at property coverage, if you have like a building or business personal property like office equipment and things like that, it acts kind of that same way if there's a breach to protect your business in that case. And you also need to make sure that it covers third parties. So if you're doing work for other people and cause a breach, you could be liable for that. And so that gives you coverage for that type of breach as well.
Great, thank you so much. My next question for Megan. Welcome to the panel. Thanks so much for joining us today. Given the recent mass adoption of working from home for all of us in businesses, what do you now see as the biggest vulnerability for data loss? How can we make sure that we don't lose our data to one of these threats?
Yeah. Just want to make sure that you guys can hear me here as I come off mute.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think for data loss, we can really break it down into two camps. So our two main issues we're dealing with from our side that we're seeing is one, user error, which ultimately plays into the second camp of these malwares and other ransomware threats. So for example, everyone's working from home now, and we need to understand that more plays into that from a security side than just this nice change of scenery we have. So for example, we're not saving things as how we're used to, like on our servers that are in our office. And we're putting data, like we need to understand that where we're putting this data is secured and backed up. So like, where is it getting saved? Is it going to our desktop? Is it going to a OneDrive file? If we aren't backing these up, the desktop, OneDrive, and we get hit with CryptoLocker, ransomware, and all of our eggs are in one basket, it's really a short-sighted tactic and strategy there. And then beyond the scope of malware is just our own selves, where we as people naturally and accidentally do terrible things to networks. We start clicking on links, we're downloading files, we're watching Netflix on our work computer, and ultimately we're just our own worst enemy. So almost half of all data deletion is just caused by us as users accidentally doing that. So I think it's important to, again, back it up and understand where's your data getting stored and is it protected? And we need to make sure that everyone is bought into these expectations and really and truly follows them.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. One question that we had from our Q&A from our attendees, can you all offer any advice or best practices to a small company using G Drive or Google Drive for backup and document storage? And I'll actually expand the question. So that category of G Drive or document storage is really called file sync and share. And that would apply to Dropbox, to G Drive, to Box, to Datto Workplace. So I'll just open it up to the panel. Any guidance there or best practices for if we're storing our data in the cloud?
Yeah, I can jump on this one here. For data and cloud storage, I think it's important that we need to understand what the cloud covers and what the cloud doesn't cover. Especially recently, everyone's been migrating to Office 365. We've been migrating to cloud to make sure applications are sure and accessible. So I'd say for working with these file sync and share solutions, you need to understand, and that's why you want to work with an IT service provider like LogicSpeak, because they're really the experts on the different solutions out there. And seeing what kind of version retentions is Dropbox providing for your business. Where is that data getting stored? If you're a HIPAA compliant organization and you're dealing with PCI information, you can't be leveraging a solution where you're being synced to a public cloud. So making sure that you really have a solution that does offer either backup or long-term versioning and making sure that that is aligning with your business. There's great consumer grade products out there for sharing my files and vacation photos, but those aren't the most applicable when I'm really dealing with business sensitive information.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And just to add to that from LogicSpeak, we support clients with many different file sync and share. Office 365 includes OneDrive for Business. G Suite includes G Drive, and then we also work with Datto on Datto Workplace. And one of the biggest things that Josh already alluded to is enabling multi-factor authentication, or 2FA or MFA. It's referred to that a lot in the industry, but ultimately having that in place in front of your G Drive or in front of your OneDrive for Business, so that even if you're compromised, that you can, that people still don't have access to your data. And then lastly, just make sure that your data in your file sync and share application, that people have the least access that they have to be able to do their jobs. So instead of having a big share called Office that everyone has access to, that they put their private information, they put their public information, they put their information for marketing and for HR and for accounting, to segment that up into multiple different root projects or multiple different root folders, and only allow permissions to the people that absolutely have to have it, so that if there is a breach or when there is a breach, that less access is given to all of the data in your organization. So the next question here. So Josh, for you mentioned social engineering, and I've seen a lot of posts going around these last few days from friends of mine on Facebook, asking everyone to post the first car we ever drove, or to fill out this survey about your habits or your preferences and what you like and don't like, or posting even your high school graduation picture. Should we all close our Facebook accounts? Are there any happy mediums?
No, I think it's just like anything else. I mean, it's social media is part of our lifestyles now, and it's just part of society. So you just have to be careful with what you put out there. And then as far as bad actors go, just try not to make yourself as much of a target as you can be. So don't put out every detail of your life, or I'm trying not to dance around the question, but yeah, there's just a balance, and there's no right answer to that. It's okay to have social media, but just understand that anything that you put out there on social media is exactly what it says it is. It's out there. So these bad actors can see it just like anyone else can, and they will use it. They use it in almost every engagement we work. There's some form of social engineering involved. So again, not to dance around the question, but just be cognizant of what you put out there, and understand that it can be used negatively, just like it can be used on social media.
Thanks so much, Josh. Nathan, real quickly. So we talked a lot about the protections that we need in place. We talked about multi-factor authentication, and Josh made a lot of recommendations. What if we don't have kind of certain baseline security things in place, or we don't have, good security, is that a possibility if we do have cybersecurity insurance that a claim might not be covered, or that we might be denied because we're not in compliance? And how does that work?
Well, I think there's a lot of moving parts to that question, and most insurance policies vary greatly in terms of what is available to each customer. And it's really important to have like an independent agent evaluate your business needs and then align the products up with you. I'm not a licensed agent, so I can't really advise anybody of the coverages, but some of the things that you need to look for is in the definitions of what the coverages are. And an example for errors and omissions coverage that's out there, it may cover only certain facets of your business that you're doing. So it's very specific and tailored to what you are doing as a company. You want to look for a broader definition that's more open in terms of the work and the services that you're providing, but not necessarily the specific ones. You also want to look at the limits that are available to you as a customer. So if your policy may state that you have cyber insurance in there and it's factual, but it may only have $25,000 worth of coverage. Or it could be sharing that limit that's available for multiple different coverages out there. So you're sharing that limit. So if you have multiple problems, you may erode your limit as you're paying out that claim. My job as an underwriter really is to underwrite the risk that we're putting on the books. So that means that we're going to ask a lot of those questions that are coming up in the security practices that people are, that have been outlined in this meeting. And so one of the things like dual authentication, well, if we're providing social engineering coverage, we're going to ask if there's dual authentication there. And your rates and your limits will vary based off the protections that you put in place. So the more protection, the lower your rate, the higher the limits that we'll put out. And if those things aren't there, we may not even quote the business to start with. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks so much. One other question that came in here from the Q&A, and it's about reporting. And so I'll ask kind of a multi-process or a multi-step question here. So the question is, are we supposed to report crimes like these if they happen to our company, or is our MSP doing that for us? And then I'll add on or piggyback onto that. What is the process? Let's say we are breached. What would you say? And probably this will go to the Secret Service guys. What would you say about if we do have a breach? What kind of information do we need? What will you guys be looking for, and how quickly will you guys respond? So I'll open that up to Marc, and then I'll probably close with a few statements as well there.
I'll make a couple comments and let Josh talk about what we are looking for in a response. But we always say, and I think I may have mentioned this before, is the need to just call someone. So many people don't involve law enforcement in their call chain. Of course, predicating that, you have to have a plan, a cyber response plan. And I would further say it has to be an exercise plan, and one that you guys that folks have tabletop exercised, and there's copies of things at home in a situation like this, hard copies where you know who to call if an incident happens. And so having those relationships, being a part of, I mentioned in the beginning, being a part of task force memberships, the FBI has task force, Secret Service has task forces. I say be a part of them all. It can never hurt to have too many relationships, because when things go bad, you need to have people that you can trust and know to help work with you. The Secret Service is not an IR firm, an incident response firm, but we do help companies, with our goal obviously being attribution, getting the bad guys. Notifying us early in case of BEC within 72 hours. If we're not notified within 72 hours, getting your money back is pretty non-existent. We are very successful in getting money back if it's within that time frame. As far as what we need from companies when we respond, Josh, you want to jump in real quick?
Sure, quickly. A lot of times people are hesitant to call law enforcement because they have proprietary data or sensitive data, or really don't know what we're going to ask for. And we always tell them that only about 5% of data off of one system out of 100%, of course, is about all we would need in an engagement. So we have very targeted data that we like to go after. We're not going to come in and try to image an entire environment and grab all of that like I said, sensitive data or anything like that. And as Marc said, having part of your incident response plan notating what you can share immediately. That's the big thing, is we want access to those SIM logs and Active Directory logs and firewall logs and copies of malware if they've been found or things like that. It's just important to have as part of your incident response plan those things noted that you can share with law enforcement in a timely manner, because a lot of that has a finite lifespan, and we need to follow up on those IPs and those domains and things that we need to follow up on with legal service. We need to do it sooner than later. So yeah, we only need a small portion of data, but it's just most important to note that you can share that data timely in a response.
Thanks so much, Josh and Mark. And from LogicSpeak, the one part of that question, absolutely, LogicSpeak will be walking with you every step of the way. And the sooner we are, the sooner we're involved, the sooner we can capture that data and work, with you or alongside you with the Secret Service, the FBI, whoever the law enforcement organization might be, to get those technical answers to those questions and help to capture and store some of that information before it's lost. So absolutely, let us know as quickly as you possibly can so that we can get involved and again walk through the process with you every step of the way. So thank you for the question.
Jason, also from an insurance standpoint, we complement all those resources as well, and we'll get forensic analysis in to make sure that we're getting the resources to help solve it and involve law enforcement where we need it.
And thanks so much, Nathan, for actually for chiming in there. I was going to say, in the times where we have had to involve cybersecurity insurance, the insurance company has been incredibly helpful at providing resources because, as you can imagine, they have a vested interest in catching the bad guys too, because it's their money that's on the line. And so we've actually found the insurance providers to be super helpful, to have a lot of resources at their disposal that maybe even we didn't have. And so absolutely involving, when you do, and I recommend that you all on the call have cybersecurity insurance, but when you do have those incidents, to involve your insurance provider sooner rather than later is incredibly good. So thank you very much for that. Couple of technical Q&A questions. Is the act of opening an email providing an opportunity for exposure, or does a person need to actually click a link to execute malicious activity? And Josh, you and I can take that if you want to chime in, and I may add a few things from our side as well.
Sure. It's been my experience that an activity has to occur for that incident to move forward, for that malicious activity to move forward. There has to be something occur. You either have to click a link, you have to open an attachment and have macros enabled. There has to be another step. I haven't personally seen an incident where just viewing an email or opening an email has actually been the specific attack vector. There's always been another activity involved by the user.
And to echo that as well, early on in the days of email, with the earliest versions of Microsoft Outlook, literally previewing an email would execute web code that might go and run some malicious code. But Microsoft figured that out pretty quickly through some of those big infections that we saw going on years ago. And so now the default settings in Outlook are to not run any sort of code or anything that might be malicious. Nothing gets run until you open it and so I agree with you. I have not seen that happen as well lately. One other technical question while we're on the technical side of things, do you guys have any best practices for keeping phones safe, since they are the kind of the MFA or the two-factor, the second factor, or is there anything that we should be doing from a cell phone perspective to keep those phones safe? And Josh, I'll let you start, and then I can jump in as well.
Again, I think we touched on it. Just make sure your device is encrypted. So if it is lost, all that personal data isn't just easily accessible. Number two, just treat your mobile device, your phone, just like you would a computer. I mean, right now there's phishing attempts that are rampant in the wild on mobile devices specifically. When you download applications, be very careful. There's I've read there's thousands of malicious applications in the Android store right now that can be downloaded and have adware, or some have malware specifically built into them. So just use some of those cyber hygiene tips that we talked about. Encrypt your devices, be careful what you download, don't click on anything, don't open attachments that you don't know who they're from. things like that.
Great. Yeah, and a couple of things that we'll add from a practical perspective. Make sure that you have a password on your phone. You know, you know, my parents, I still have to remind them, hey, like you can't just open your phone without a password. And then Josh, my follow-up would be, do we, you know, from a Face ID on an iPhone or an Android face recognition, as well as fingerprint recognition, do we view those as safe? Are those good protections, or is entering a complex password the only recommended solution there?
No, I would say that the manufacturer done a tremendous job of making the biometric, both the Face ID and the fingerprint ID, a very, you know, it's a safe way of protecting your device. It's typically, I mean, it's basically just a biometric representation of a data set anyway. So technically, it's just as secure as a complex password.
Great, thanks. Megan, for you, a lot of businesses are, and Mark mentioned it already, are relying heavily on Office 365. We're a Microsoft partner as well. And so we get this question a lot. Microsoft is backing up our data, so we don't need to worry, right?
That's a great question. And I think there is a misconception that Microsoft or even Google has your data backup. And they do at a very, very high level. But for our individual Office environments, I'd argue that that's just not true. So if you look very specifically into the user licensing agreements for Microsoft and even Google, they actually encourage you to implement a dedicated third-party email backup solution, because emails, as we've been discussing with phishing campaigns, are just as susceptible to data loss as any of the other on-prem applications you're working on in a business environment. And we're always falling back to the number one cause of data loss is human error. But we're also subject to these other vulnerabilities of malicious deletion. Maybe I'm upset with the company and I'm on my way out the door, so I'm going to cover my tracks. And then also with the malware and ransomware side, with these COVID-19 email phishing campaigns, or even something just as simple as, hey, let's update our spam preferences. Here's an email that looks and feels like Microsoft. So Microsoft has published what they deem their shared responsibility model, and it basically is, what is Microsoft covering, and then what are you as a user responsible for? So Microsoft isn't providing any guarantees around restores unless that data loss is a result of their hardware or infrastructure failure, or a software failure on their point, natural disaster, or a power outage. So we're talking really big scopes of doom and gloom that's affecting all of Microsoft's data centers. But us as users need to protect our own Office 365, our individual environment. So things protecting against the human error, the malicious deletion, and all of that. So making sure you have a dedicated solution to back up that environment, and it's very low cost to get protected. So it's not anything crazy, but it's just making sure that you can restore your individual emails, and even for some folks meet compliancy concerns. Microsoft's only protecting and backing up data for 30 days in their data center. What if you're a HIPAA organization and you need to go back 5-7 years and you get audited or you get subpoenaed for these records and you can't provide them? So again, having a backup solution can help protect you on that facet, as well as being able to have long-term data retention. Awesome.
Thank you so much. I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions. Nathan, this one's for you. So what if we're impacted? So as businesses, what if we're impacted by an outside third party, either a supplier, a vendor, or a partner that may be compromised or may compromise my environment? Are those items covered in my cybersecurity policy or theirs? And a quick asterisk, LogicSpeak does actually have cybersecurity insurance as well. So we are covered in that realm, but that's for you, Nathan.
Yeah, so this is an excellent question, because a lot of companies don't focus on the vendors or the suppliers, and so I think that the prudent thing to do is in the beginning stages of entering an agreement with somebody is always have a contractual relationship to any vendor or supplier. You know, an attorney should help you design that contract, and then really the goal here is to transfer the responsibility for the work or services being performed on your behalf. So you're responsible for your work, they're responsible for their work, and those delineations should be clear in that contract. And you should also set a minimum limit to carry for the general liability for your workers. General liability and your professional liability, and require that they have workers' compensation insurance for their employees as well. So if you have a subcontractor working for you, they're on your premises and get hurt, the workers' comp for that individual should be the immediate remedy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay.
But you have those minimum limits set, and then ask for the certificate of insurance up front before they enter your business.
Cool. And for our final question, this question from the Q&A, can you all discuss best practices for email marketing? Unfortunately, a lot of campaigns require a download or a right click to see the content. Should we disable this feature? Is there another way to determine possible threats outside of the phishing tips mentioned earlier? So I'll actually start this with some thoughts, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, and Ashley, even our marketing coordinator here on the call, can chime in if she'd like. But so one of the things that I always talk to our clients about is we get an email and we feel the need or the obligation to click on the link from inside the email. But one of the best ways to protect yourself is to actually ignore the link in the email and go directly to the vendor if it's a vendor you're not familiar with, or a potential partner or a vendor that you're not familiar with, and just go to their website directly. Either search for them in Google or type in a URL that that is their website, if it looks reputable, and try to go around the email marketing campaign to get to the content and see if they're actually legitimate. And then once you validate that they are legitimate via an outside source, then you can feel confident clicking on the link. The other, which I believe Josh already mentioned, is inspect the link. Right click on the link and go to properties to see if the actual domain is a domain that they own, or is a well-known MailChimp, Constant Contact, one of the kind of the big email marketing companies. But don't just take the email, on its face. Actually do some investigation before you click on something. So that's one tip. And if anybody on the panel wants to offer up any additional kind of email marketing best practices as well.
We have one thing our company does is we do indicate any email communication coming in from an external source. It is marked with an E with an exclamation part in the subject line as it comes into our business. So we automatically know if it's internal or external. And in this case, you're going to have external communication, but that's a layer of just education and employee awareness to make sure that they're recognizing that this email is coming from an outside source, and don't automatically click on the link. It's just kind of that programming for an education part that would help you identify it, but then take the steps that was just mentioned in reviewing the links.
Great, thanks. So I think, guys, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for our panel. I wanted to say a huge thank you to Marc, to Josh, Megan, and Nathan for taking time out of their busy weeks to be on our webinar. The information you contributed is super valuable, both for us and I know for our attendees as well. And we're really grateful to have you guys working to help keep us safe. So in closing, Scott, if you could change the slide, please. In closing, if you heard anything that you'd like more information about, or if you have any questions that we weren't able to get to, or anything that comes up after the webinar is closed, please feel free to reach out. I've included my contact information, email, direct phone number, as well as my cell, and then our information for Logic Speak as well. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you to find out how you liked the webinar, and answer any questions that you might have. One also final point is that we are recording the webinar, and that will be distributed at the end of the webinar to any of the attendees as well. So thanks again for your time today. I hope everyone stays safe, both technologically and physically, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future.